This is the construction site of the Sunshine Home Phase 3 project by Country Garden in Beihai, Guangxi. The footage shows the project in a state of suspension with not a single person on site. Since the project halted last year, there have been ongoing rumors of it becoming deserted. Here we are again, visiting this heartbreak spot. The whole construction site is deserted, just like it was last year. On February 28th, a homeowner from Country Garden's overseas Chinese town in Zizhong, Sichuan, revisited the construction site. The developer was supposed to hand over the homes by June 30th last year, but due to Country Garden's debt crisis last year, the project has been on hold ever since. Despite multiple promises from the developer to resume work, even announcing an expected completion date before January 30th this year, there was still no sign of resuming. Since encountering a debt crisis last year, Country Garden, China's largest private real estate developer, has seen many of its property development projects halted due to a break in funding chain, putting them at risk of becoming unfinished projects. I wonder how many houses built by Country Garden might end up as unfinished projects. Country Garden has yet to deliver homes worth over 600 billion yuan. If we estimate each unit to be around 800,000 yuan, then at least 750,000 families are at risk of ending up with unfinished homes. What's worse, Country Garden seems to specifically target the poor. It was the first developer to go down the path of focusing on smaller cities. While other developers were busy making a quick buck in big cities, Country Garden had already set its sight on folks from smaller towns. Before 2014, home prices in many county towns were only around 2,000 to 3,000 yuan per square meter, and people lived relatively comfortably. But everything changed when Country Garden arrived. They used a set of tricks to inflate property prices, rapidly increasing them to over 10,000 yuan per square meter in just a few years. Before Country Garden, folks weren't in a rush to buy property. Even though their incomes weren't increasing much, housing prices weren't going up much either. But once Country Garden came along, property prices started doubling crazily, forcing people to shell out money. After all, even a slight increase in price could mean a year or even years of hard-earned savings. I've seen a lady from the countryside who made her living by farming and odd jobs. To buy a property for her son, she spent all her life savings, sold all her corn, and even her pigs and sheep she had raised for years, just to make the down payment for a property in the city. These are the poorest folks in China who spent their entire life savings only to have it all reaped away by developers. Country Garden made a fortune by exploiting these very people, becoming the top real estate company, with the Yang family frequently topping the list of China's wealthiest. Now, as Country Garden is about to collapse, these poor people will be punished along with it. After the tide recedes, the property prices in third and fourth tier cities will crash back to reality. And even scarier is the disaster of millions of unfinished homes, created by the likes of Evergrande and Country Garden, becoming an unbearable catastrophe for countless families. In fact, according to public data, as of early 2023, Country Garden had about 1.1 million homes yet to be delivered. These homes have already been sold, and homeowners are waiting to take possession. Construction still hasn't resumed, and homeowners have instead received even worse news. On February 28th, Country Garden announced that they were served a lawsuit due to unpaid loans. This not only makes its debt restructuring prospects uncertain, but also raises fears that Country Garden could become the next Evergrande, facing the risk of bankruptcy and liquidation. This also means that a large number of projects are at substantial risk of being abandoned. Country Garden, listed in Hong Kong, announced that it had been made aware of a legal suit filed by the creditor Kingboard Holdings, wholly owned subsidiary Evercredit, to the High Court of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region on February 27. The lawsuit involves an unpaid term loan and accrued interest of approximately 1.6 billion Hong Kong dollars. That is around 205 million US dollars. According to the suit, if Country Garden is eventually liquidated, without an order of approval from the High Court of Hong Kong, any transfer of shares made by Country Garden on or after the commencement date will be deemed invalid. In its regulatory filing to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, Country Garden stated it would oppose the suit filed by Evercredit. The filing of the suit does not mean that Evercredit will succeed in liquidating Country Garden. Just a month ago, the heavily indebted Evergrande Group was ordered by the High Court of Hong Kong to be liquidated. This officially started the liquidation process. Based on Evergrande's experience, the court is not expected to rule on the suit anytime soon. In June 2022, Topshine Global filed a suit against China Evergrande in the High Court of Hong Kong, involving a net debt of 862 million Hong Kong dollars. After being postponed 7 times, China Evergrande finally faced liquidation on January 29th this year. Evergrande is now undergoing a complex restructuring process which some investors believe could last over a decade. Therefore, it remains to be seen what situation Country Garden will face next. As of now, the High Court of Hong Kong has not issued a liquidation order for the company, but the first hearing date for the petition has been set for May 17. Since July last year, Country Garden has been in huge debt and triggered a default clause in October by failing to pay a $15.4 million bond interest payment on time. Subsequently, Country Garden formed an ad hoc group of international bondholders. It is unclear whether restructuring negotiations have begun. Country Garden's total debt stands at 1.43 trillion yuan, about $200 billion, second only to Evergrande's 2.4 trillion yuan, making it one of the most indebted real estate developers in the world. Experts say that the liquidation suit filed by creditors against Country Garden represents a lack of recognition for China's domestic economic rescue plans. The suit is also a form of pressure to force Country Garden to make greater concessions, which could have a significant negative impact on its debt restructuring. American economist Davey Huang stated that the $205 million is not a majority of Country Garden's debt. However, following the Evergrande incident, which has already caused panic in the entire investment market, this will lead to significant doubt among other creditors about Country Garden's ability to repay its debts. The CCP has been advocating for mitigating risks in the real estate sector. On February 28th, Country Garden stated that 135 of its projects have been listed by local governments as suitable for financing support, entering the so-called whitelist. Country Garden claimed that after being selected for the whitelist, its related projects would receive financial support. This would help to relieve financial pressure, ensure delivery, revitalize assets, and enhance the project's economic outlook. However, the liquidation suit against Country Garden shows that creditors do not trust the government support for Country Garden. Davey Huang believes that Country Garden's overall difficulties have not been resolved, and we are only seeing the beginning of a solution. For creditors, on the one hand, they feel the government's rescue efforts are insufficient. On the other hand, there is still great uncertainty about whether the government can continue to provide support. Country Garden has over 1,000 projects in China, with the 135 whitelist projects accounting for only about 13% of the total. There are reports that Country Garden is expected to deliver over 480,000 homes this year, a significant reduction from the 1.1 million homes at the beginning of 2023, indicating that Country Garden did deliver a considerable number of homes in 2023. However, numerous videos online show that the homes delivered by Country Garden are merely superficial efforts, tantamount to shoddy construction projects. This is the Longyue Terrace project by Country Garden in Yichun, Jiangxi province, where homeowners claim the buildings were delivered by the developer without completion. The site is littered with construction debris and sewage, and homeowners are complaining about an unbearable stench. Homeowners who received their homes discovered that the floor drains on the rooms were fake, with no drainage system in place. The quality of Country Garden's projects is just terrible. A man discovered that the cement on the walls of a room could be easily scratched off with his hand, revealing the steel reinforcement beneath.
I'm just so unlucky with Country Garden. I don't even know what to say about them. I just changed my clothes and came back, and now the elevator's broken.
This is the Country Garden Nanjing Lukou project, where a homeowner found that the fire hydrant in the corridor was merely for show, with no water or pipes connected to it. Despite Country Garden delivering some homes under pressure from the government and homeowners, those lucky enough to avoid unfinished projects still couldn't escape substandard quality. In 2022, the Chinese government began to support the real estate market, with Country Garden not facing a debt crisis at the time. However, by last year, amidst a continued slump in the real estate market and frequent defaults by major property developers, Country Garden also couldn't evade the fate of defaulting on its debt. Despite various government measures to mitigate real estate risks, the effects have been minimal. Wang He, a Chinese affairs expert and political commentator, believes this is because, although major banks offered hundreds of billions in credit to Country Garden, actual loans were not made. In other words, it was all just talk. The whitelist system carried no water. The loans were not made because banks have their own interests and try to resist central government policies aimed at bailing out the real estate sector. All the measures introduced by the CCP try to force banks to lend to property developers. However, these banks are commercial entities with their own self-interest and don't want to risk their own capital on bad investments. Given the significant risks these banks already face, supporting shady real estate companies could lead to the collapse of both banks and real estate sectors. In recent months, Country Garden has been selling off assets and stocks to raise funds for repaying its massive debt, desperately trying to avoid bankruptcy. On January 22nd, Country Garden listed 5 assets for transfer on the Guangzhou Property Rights Exchange, totaling 3.8 billion yuan, about $530 million US dollars. Just in January, Country Garden publicly listed projects for transfer amounted to 5 billion yuan, or about $700 million US dollars. The properties for sale are all located in Guangzhou, including office buildings, office towers, hotels, and apartment buildings. Due to their clear property rights and good value, industry insiders expect these properties to be liquidated relatively quickly. Country Garden is not only selling assets in China, but they also transferred some land in Sydney, Australia in January this year. Country Garden's subsidiary in Australia, Risland, sold the equity of the Wilton Greens development project, located about 65 kilometers southwest of Sydney, to developer Avantus, with a sale price rumored to be 240 million Australian dollars. The Wilton Greens project, launched in 2019, planned to develop 3,600 homes near the new Sydney airport, including sports field, bike paths, parks, and a new school. In October 2023, Country Garden sold its stake in the Windermere project on the outskirts of Melbourne to Singapore's Fraser's Property for approximately 250 million Australian dollars. The project covers 366 hectares with potential for 5,000 homes. Country Garden held a 170-hectare share. Recently, Country Garden has invited agents to bid for its only project in London, Ailsa Wharf. In 2018, Country Garden, in partnership with a fund, acquired the land for approximately £80 million. The development projects include 1,000 homes, but construction still has not started. In December last year, Country Garden liquidated its Wanda Series equity, cashing out 3.1 billion yuan. There were also reports that Country Garden's founder, Yang Guoqiang's family, provided a 300 million interest-free loan to Country Garden. At a group executive meeting held on October 9th last year, Country Garden president Mo Bin revealed that the Yang family was also selling their private jets. Despite efforts to sell assets and equity to repay debts, Country Garden still faces significant pressure to repay its foreign debt in the first half of the year. The company has warned that it currently has 15 outstanding dollar bonds with a total balance of 9.9 billion US dollars. 2 of these are due in 2024, including a bond balance of $965 million that was due on January 27th and another balance of $537 million that is due on April 8th, totaling $1.5 billion. Additionally, about $5 billion in bonds are due to mature in the next 1 to 3 years, accounting for the majority. Bonds maturing in 5 to 10 years total about $2 billion. In China, Country Garden has successfully extended 9 bonds, involving approximately 14.7 billion yuan, delaying them for 3 years, alleviating some debt pressure. At the same time, Country Garden faces a significant crisis with declining sales and difficulty in recouping funds. Last year, Country Garden achieved equity sales of 174 billion yuan, a drop of more than 50% year over year. In January, the China Index Academy released a real estate sales performance ranking report. In it, Country Garden's rank dropped to 10th place, amounting to 7.6 billion yuan, and it ranked third by area. This is related to Country Garden's focus on third and fourth tier cities, where housing prices are relatively lower, but a monthly sales figure of less than 8 billion yuan is dramatically lower compared to past data. In January 2022, Country Garden's sales amounted to 49.4 billion yuan, ranking first. In January 2023, its sales were 27 billion yuan, dropping to third place and overtaken by Poly Real Estate and Vanke. Poor performance is, of course, closely related to the overall downturn in the real estate industry. In January this year, the top 10 real estate companies' total sales nearly reached 120 billion yuan, a 33% drop from last January. The top 100 real estate companies' sales dropped by 33.3% year over year, and compared to last December, monthly sales decreased by almost 48%. However, Country Garden's performance, compared to the same period last year, didn't just halve, but plummeted by 72%. Country Garden currently faces problems on two fronts. One is a massive debt, risking further default, and the other is the urgent need to resume construction projects and deliver homes. The overall slump in China's real estate market affects its existing property sales, making it difficult to recoup funds. With mounting problems, including a lawsuit, can Country Garden save itself? Will the Chinese government bail it out? Will it follow in Evergrande's footsteps and inevitably face liquidation and bankruptcy? We'll have to wait and see.